Let's talk about what we should expect from DeAndre Swift in 2024 fantasy football after signing a 3-year, $24 million contract with the Bears, which includes $15.3 million guaranteed. Now, the TLDR, before I even get into it, I'm cautiously optimistic for fantasy football purposes. I'm cautiously optimistic that, at worst, we're just going to see more of the same from DeAndre Swift. We're going to see a lot of what we've already seen from him in his first 4 years in the NFL. But at best, I'm cautiously optimistic that he's teed up for what could be a career year. Now, to be fair, that's really not saying all that much for DeAndre Swift. He really hasn't quite lived up to the hype from when he was a top 4 rookie running back in 2020. He really hasn't lived up to at least my expectations in fantasy football, but still, it's been a mostly fine career at worst, right? It's been pretty non-remarkable. It's been not great, but it certainly hasn't been bad. He was fantasy football's RB18 in 2020 as a rookie with the Lions. He was RB15 in 2021, which so far is the best year of his career in fantasy football, was the RB21 in 2022, and he was the RB20 last year in 2023, every year landing somewhere between 12.5 PPR points per game and 16.1 PPR points per game, right? Not bad, just not great, not quite elite, not quite the PPR monster that I was expecting from him coming out as a rookie in 2020. Now, last year with the Philadelphia Eagles, he did set several career highs across the board in terms of usage. He set a career high in touches with 268, rushing attempts with 229, scrimmage yards with over 1,200, and rushing yards with over 1,000 for the first time ever in his career. And yet, despite the biggest workload of his career, DeAndre Swift was kind of misused in Philadelphia. When I say misused, I more so mean they didn't maximize what they could get out of his skill set being an above-average pass-catching running back in the National Football League. He's coming off career lows despite that career high usage. He's coming off career lows in targets with 49, catches 39, receiving yards 214, receiving touchdowns 1, and yards per target at 4.4. He's also coming off career lows in yards per touch with 4.7 and scrimmage touchdowns with 6. To kind of put that in perspective for you, in 40 games that DeAndre Swift played with the Detroit Lions, he averaged 5.13 targets per game, never averaging less than 4.4 targets per game in a season. But in Philadelphia, he averaged just 3.1 targets per game last year. And now, the former 35th overall pick from Georgia is headed back to the NFC North. He's going to spend his age 25 season in Chicago with the Bears, where, quite frankly, it's been brutal. It's been really ugly in the last 2 years where Matt Eberflus has been the team's head coach. And candidly, it's been ugly since before then. The Bears are in quite a rough stretch. And in the 2 years that Matt Eberflus has been the team's head coach, the offenses haven't exactly worked out. They finished 18th and 23rd in scoring, 20th and 28th in yards. Running backs in particular have not performed well in the last 2 years with Matt Eberflus as the team's head coach. There's 4 areas that you want to look at when looking at a running back's potential success in fantasy football. You want to look at volume and the amount of touches they can get. You want to look at efficiency. You want to look at the amount of yards that a running back can get. You want to look at scoring chances and the amount of touchdown opportunity that a running back can get. And you want to look at receiving opportunity and the amount of targets that a running back can get. None of which, any of those 4, have been promising for running backs for the Chicago Bears in the last 2 years with Matt Eberflus. Volume has been an issue. We'll start with volume. Not a single running back in the last 2 years has averaged even just 15 touches per game for the Bears. In fact, last year, 3 different running backs landed between 115 touches and 152 touches. The year before that, 2 different running backs handled more than 137 touches, and David Montgomery was the most used, quote-unquote, running back that the Chicago Bears have had in the last 2 years. And even he averaged just 14.7 touches per game in 2022. Volume hasn't been there for Bears running backs in the last 2 years. Then you look at yards, you look at efficiency. DeAndre Swift is going from a top 5, top 1 offensive line with the Philadelphia Eagles to what will likely be a bottom 16, bottom 10 possibly offensive line with the Chicago Bears. Again, the team finished 20th and 28th in offensive yards over the last 2 seasons. And oh, by the way, as far as running backs go, Chicago Bears have not had a single running back that's been able to reach 850 or more rushing yards since David Montgomery did it back in 2020. So even before Matt Eberflus came to town, the Bears haven't had an 850-yard rusher since 2020. Yards haven't been there for running backs. Then you look at scoring opportunity and touchdown chances. That hasn't been there for Bears running backs. I mean, the Bears as a team finished 18th and 23rd in scoring in the last 2 years, so as a team, they're not scoring a lot of touchdowns, and it certainly has shown up at the running back level, as not a single running back has been able to score even just 7 touchdowns in a season with the Chicago Bears in either of the last 2 years. Deontay Foreman led the running backs, and I use the term led lightly. He had 5 touchdowns last year, followed by Khalil Herbert with 3, Rashawn Johnson with 2. The year before that, David Montgomery scored the most of all Bears running backs in the last 2 years, and again, I use the term most lightly. He scored just 6 touchdowns in 2022, which, by the way, that ranked 22nd among all running backs in the NFL. Touchdowns have not been there for Chicago Bears running backs in either of the last 2 seasons. So then you look at receiving opportunity and the amount of targets that a running back can get. That hasn't been there. Rashawn Johnson was the leader as far as targets go among all Bears running backs in the last 2 years, and he averaged 2.7 targets per game last year. They haven't had a single running back average at least 2.8 targets per game in the last 2 years. From a fantasy football standpoint, David Montgomery finished as fantasy's RB24 in 2022, and that's been by far the best running back finish that the Bears have had under Matt Eberflus in the last 2 years. There wasn't a single Bears running back that finished inside the top 46 last year. So to recap, in 2 years under Matt Eberflus, 0 running backs have averaged 15 or more touches per game. 0 running backs have rushed for even 850 yards in a season. 0 running backs have scored even just 7 touchdowns in a season. 0 running backs have averaged even just 2.8 targets per game in a season. And 0 running backs have finished inside the top 23 of fantasy football, only one of which finished inside the top 46. It's been bad. It's been ugly. So why in the world would I have any optimism about DeAndre Swift moving forward? The sliver of optimism begins with recognizing that the Chicago Bears offense is going to look dramatically different in 2024 than it did in 2023, 2022, and several of the previous years. They're bringing in a brand new quarterback. They traded away Justin Fields to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to be bringing in Caleb Williams with their first overall pick, which, by the way, we will be covering incoming rookies in fantasy football. Now is a good time to press that subscribe button if you haven't already. They brought in a bona fide wide receiver 2, or maybe even wide receiver 1, when they traded for Keenan Allen. So now they have, on one side of the field, they have DJ Moore. On the other side, they have Keenan Allen, which is terrifying for opposing defenses to try and figure out. And by the way, I already covered Keenan Allen going to the Bears and what that means for fantasy football. If you're interested in checking that out, it's episode 8 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. New quarterback, new wide receiver, new running back, DeAndre Swift. The contract that they gave DeAndre Swift already suggests he should see more volume than what we have seen from any of the Bears running backs in the last 2 years. They gave him a 3-year, $24 million contract, which includes $15.3 million guaranteed. Usually, NFL franchises do not pay that kind of money to a free agent running back unless they anticipate him being a focal point and a key focus in their offense, which frankly makes a lot of sense when you're bringing in a rookie quarterback and you want to limit his exposure to liability. Put the ball in your running back's belly. DeAndre Swift's contract already suggests he should get more volume than anything we've seen from Bears running backs in the last 2 years. And then the offense itself, the guy calling the shots, the offensive coordinator, that's completely changed, right? We've talked a lot about Matt Eberflus being the head coach and Bears running backs struggling under Matt Eberflus, which is true, and it's good to know, but it's also really important to remember that Matt Eberflus is a defensive-minded head coach. He turns his offenses over to the offensive coordinator, and there's a brand new one in 2024. Luke Getsy did the job in 2022 and 2023. He's now at the Raiders. In his place is Shane Waldron, a guy who spent the last 3 years as the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. And again, in episode 8, I detailed the work that Shane Waldron has done in the NFL as a coach in the National Football League. To run it back for you and give you the TLDR, his work in the NFL it's been a lot like DeAndre Swift's. It hasn't been great, it hasn't been terrible. It's been kind of middle of the road, it's been up and down. He has been middle of the road in scoring. His offenses have finished 16th, 9th, and 17th, so maybe slightly above average there. They've been up and down in offensive yards. They finished 20th, 13th, and 21st. They have not run the ball very much in terms of volume. They finished 27th, 22nd, and 31st in rushing attempts. And there's no denying that. That's a red flag when you're considering a running back in fantasy football. Despite that low volume, they've been slightly better in rushing yards, finishing 11th, 18th, and 28th, but that's still subpar. And they finished 9th, 22nd, and 20th in rushing touchdowns. Now, the big thing to know about Shane Waldron, at least in his time with the Seattle Seahawks, is he runs arguably the slowest offense in the entire NFL. 3 years with the Seahawks as their offensive coordinator, 2 of those years, his team finished dead last in offensive plays executed. Okay, they finished 32nd, 22nd, and 32nd in offensive plays that they've run. Again, that's a red flag. You want as much volume as you can possibly get in fantasy football. Now, where it brightens up a little bit for Shane Waldron is, despite his offenses being slow, they're efficient. They've done very well when they have had the football. They were efficient in scoring, right? Despite finishing dead last in plays run in 2 of 3 seasons, they finished 19th, 9th, and 11th in scoring percentage, meaning the percentage of time that they had the ball, they put points on the board. And they've been above average in that metric. Also, really key here is that even though they didn't run the ball very much, right? 27th, 22nd, and 31st in rushing attempts, they were efficient in rushing yardage, finishing 3rd, 7th, and 16th in yards per attempt. So his offenses have done a pretty good job of creating space for running backs to navigate. Now, down to the individual level, 2021 was a lost year for Seattle Seahawks running backs. Chris Carson was the guy, but he went down after 4 games and quite frankly, never really returned to the NFL. In 2021, they turned to a committee of Rashad Penny, Alex Collins, neither of which averaged even just 13 touches per game, and Rashad Penny finished as fantasy's RB42. Pretty much a lost year for Seahawks running backs. But when you look at the following 2 years with Shane Waldron, things start to look quite a bit better, right? 2022 was the year of Kenneth Walker and his arrival. He averaged 17 touches per game, he scored 9 touchdowns, and he finished as fantasy's RB18, all of which already sounds better than anything, all of which already is better than any of the running backs that we've seen from the Chicago Bears in the last 2 years. 2023, Kenneth Walker finished with averaging 16.5 touches per game, with 9 more touchdowns and finishing his fantasy's RB19. So each of the last 2 years, Kenneth Walker has already been better than any of the Bears running backs that we've seen in any of the last 2 years. Slight sliver of optimism there. Ultimately, there's a lot of questions, right? There's no denying it. There's plenty of pros, there's plenty of cons. It's just not as clear-cut of a situation like it was with like Derrick Henry, for example, who I gushed over in episode 7. Like everything aligns perfectly for Derrick Henry. It's not that clear for DeAndre Swift. It's just not, right? On the one hand, on the good hand, the Bears offense should be better. They should score more points. Plenty of upgrades. Upgrade at quarterback, theoretically. Upgrade at running back. Upgrade at wide receiver 2. Upgrade at offensive coordinator. They should be better. They should score more points. There should be opportunities for DeAndre Swift to score touchdowns. His contract suggests volume. The contract that the Bears gave DeAndre Swift suggests he should get more touches than other running backs that we've seen on the Bears in the last few years. But then on the other hand, on the negative hand, there's no denying that the Chicago Bears offensive line is a downgrade. It's a step back from running behind the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. There's no denying that. It's also not particularly encouraging that Shane Waldron and Matt Eberflus are not exactly screaming successes as coaches in the NFL. And then there's also a little bit of competition in that backfield. You got Rashawn Johnson, who the Bears spent a 4th-round pick on out of Texas last year, who was widely considered to be one of the better pass-catching running backs in the NFL. So it's fair to wonder if he's going to cut into DeAndre Swift's receiving opportunity, which would cap DeAndre Swift's upside. There's just a lot of questions. There's a lot of pros and cons to kind of sift through. Ultimately, it's likely that DeAndre Swift should get enough volume and he should be in a good enough offense to, at worst, give us production like what we've already seen in the first 4 years of his career, where he finished anywhere between RB15 and RB21. Okay, he's been an RB2 in every single year, all 4 years that he's been in the NFL. At worst, that shouldn't change. He should be an RB2 at worst. Now, there is a sliver of optimism that if he gets involved in the passing game, and if the Bears offense does take off and go through the roof and looks like the 2023 Texans, now we're talking about unlocking his potential through receiving upside, through touchdown upside. Ultimately, I'm treating DeAndre Swift as a rock-solid RB2 option with upside for more if they unlock him in the passing game and give him opportunities to score touchdown. Cautious optimism for DeAndre Swift heading into 2024. Just like I have cautious optimism for you, your fitness, your health, and your nutrition heading into 2024 as well. If your health and fitness is something that you're trying to take more seriously moving forward, you need to get in touch with Jordan Poggle using the information that we left for you in the show notes. I personally work with Jordan. He's become a good friend of mine, and I've worked with him for over a year now on my own health, my own fitness, my own nutrition. He's helped me lower my cholesterol, lower my blood pressure. Heck, I even accidentally lost 11 pounds, which wasn't even the focus to begin with. And I know another Basement Brewed Fantasy Football member who lost over 30 pounds in 4 months working with Jordan. Get in touch with Jordan using the information we left for you in the show notes, and let him know that Mikey sent you so that you can get 10% off your first 4 months of working with him. Let's talk about Zack Moss going to the Cincinnati Bengals and what that means for 2024 fantasy football. And at first, on the surface, this is exciting for fantasy football purposes. At first. Right, you're taking a guy who looked awesome last year. He was great for fantasy football purposes. Great waiver wire pickup that won people weeks in fantasy football. There were 7 games last year that Jonathan Taylor had 7 or less touches or missed the game entirely. And in those 7 games, Zack Moss was the guy who stepped up, and Zack Moss was the guy who averaged 16-plus PPR points per game on 20-plus touches per game. And now you're taking him after a great season, and you're putting him into a Joe Burrow offense that has finished 16th or better in scoring in each of the last 3 years, including top 7 in scoring in 2 of the last 3 years. You're taking Zack Moss and you're theoretically giving him the RB1 role after the Bengals traded Joe Mixon to the Texans, after Joe Mixon averaged 18.2 touches per game and 3.8 targets per game. You're taking Zack Moss and you're putting him into the RB1 role where Joe Mixon had 1,200 plus scrimmage yards and 8 plus touchdowns in 5 of the last 7 seasons. You're taking Zack Moss and you're putting him into the RB1 role where Joe Mixon was a top 14 running back in fantasy football in 5 of 7 seasons, and he was the RB6 or better in 2 of the last 3 seasons. And now you got Zack Moss taking that role. Sounds great. It's exciting on the surface at first. But Zack Moss is not Joe Mixon. Put simply, he's not. He never has been. He likely never will be. You have to understand, Joe Mixon is a career-long workhorse in the National Football League. The guy has averaged over 19 touches per game in his entire 7-year career. We actually talked a lot about it in episode 9 of Inside the 20, where we talked about Joe Mixon going to the Texans and what that means for 2024 fantasy football. So, if you want to know how to approach Joe Mixon in 2024, you want to go right here, episode 9. But Joe Mixon is a career-long workhorse, and Zack Moss is not. Zack Moss is a career-long role player. And that's not meant to be a knock on Zack Moss. He's a perfectly fine NFL running back. He's an easy guy to root for. He's just not Joe Mixon. Moss has been in the NFL for 4 years now. Okay, he was a third-round pick in 2020 out of Utah by the Buffalo Bills. He's been around for 4 seasons, and he has career highs, most of which were set last year, career highs of 210 touches, 794 rushing yards, 37 targets, 7 touchdowns, and 986 scrimmage yards. The guy has never even hit 1,000 scrimmage yards in a season, let alone rushing yards. And all of that, by the way, it's not like he was stuck in these bad offenses or buried behind stud running backs. He spent the first 2 years of his career in a Josh Allen Buffalo Bills offense with nothing but Devin Singletary in his way as competition for touches in the backfield. He's been in good offenses. He's been in backfields where he has an opportunity to take over. It just hasn't panned out because he's not Joe Mixon. I'm not saying he can't or won't set new career highs in 2024. In all likelihood, he is going to set new career highs, just given the opportunity that he's walking into. All I'm saying is it's not wise for us to expect him to suddenly be Joe Mixon just because he's taking Joe Mixon's role, theoretically. Which, by the way, Chase Brown is still in town. That's a guy that the Bengals spent their 5th-round draft pick on last year. Chase Brown got involved down the stretch in 2023. He averaged 8.8 touches per game over the last 6 games. He actually had 9 or more touches in 4 of the last 6 games. It's unlikely he just disappears. It's more than likely that Cincinnati continues to use Chase Brown, maybe in a committee. And even if they don't, Cincinnati has 5 picks inside the top 115 picks in this year's NFL draft, including 2 third-round picks. They have picks 18, 49, 80, 97, and then they have a 4th, a 5th, a 6th. They have 2 6th-round picks. So Zack Moss is not Joe Mixon. Chase Brown is still in town, and it's entirely possible the Bengals add another running back in the NFL draft. Still, heading towards week 1, Zack Moss is likely penciled in as the team's RB1. Okay, he's likely safe to project for anywhere between 13 and 18 touches per game heading towards week 1. Now, unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, given that Zack Moss has been in the NFL for 4 years, we do have a sample size to lean on. It's a small sample size, but we do have some data. There have been 13 career games in Zack Moss's career where he landed somewhere between 13 and 18 touches. And in those 13 games, he averaged just 11.5 PPR points per game on 14.4 touches. He scored 13 or more PPR points in just 3 of those 13 games. So only 23% of the time was he scoring 13 or more points. And worse than that, Zack Moss scored less than 10 PPR points in 6 of those 13 games where he handled between 13 and 18 touches. Okay, so right around 50% of the time, despite getting 13 to 18 touches, Zack Moss is getting you less than 10 PPR points. And by the way, even if you want to give him a bigger workload, even if you want to project him for 15 to 20 touches, it's still ugly. Still a small sample size. There have only been 5 games in Zack Moss's career where he lands between 15 and 20 touches. But in those 5 games, Zack Moss has averaged 9.9 PPR points per game. He has scored less than 10 PPR points per game in 4 of 5 career games where he handled between 15 and 20 touches. That is actually really hard to do in the NFL, to handle a workload between 15 and 20 touches and score less than 10 PPR points. Zack Moss has done it 4 of 5 times. Okay? He's just not Joe Mixon. Now, what is encouraging for Zack Moss heading into 2024 for fantasy football purposes is that he is likely to occupy Joe Mixon's role inside the 5-yard line, and that is a fruitful role. Joe Mixon is frequently, consistently, has been one of the top 5 most used running backs in the NFL when a team gets inside the 5-yard line, which happens frequently when you have Joe Burrow playing quarterback. Joe Mixon has had 17 or more opportunities to take the football into the end zone inside the 5-yard line in each of the last 3 years, which, by the way, he's been a top 4 running back in opportunities given inside the 5-yard line in each of the last 3 years, and he's handled 93.8% of the team's attempts or more in each of the last 3 years. So Zack Moss should be given plenty of touchdown opportunities inside the 5-yard line in 2024, and that is likely to be his saving grace from a fantasy football standpoint. It's going to come down to average draft position. But ultimately, I'm approaching Zack Moss as a touchdown or bust RB2 option / high-end RB3 option in 2024 fantasy football. Quite frankly, given his contract, 2 years, $8 million, and given his career kind of underperformance, and given how many draft picks the Bengals have and Chase Brown, I think it's entirely possible that not only is Zack Moss not the workhorse that we've seen from Joe Mixon over the last several years, I think it's entirely possible that by week 10 or 11, Zack Moss isn't even the main running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think in all likelihood, there is a frustrating committee that is difficult to predict on a week-to-week basis from a fantasy football standpoint, and Zack Moss more than likely is going to need to butter his bread on touchdowns more than anything. He's a touchdown or bust RB2 / RB3 type of option. I consider him more of a trap than I consider him somebody I want to target in my fantasy football drafts. Last Friday, I sat down with Kevin Dyson, the former first-round wide receiver of the Tennessee Oilers and the key member of both the Music City Miracle and the guy who came up 1 yard short of tying the game in Super Bowl 34. We sat down to discuss the details, the intricacies of both those plays, strange circumstances that led to Kevin Dyson even being on the field in those moments. And of course, we talked about the highs and the devastating lows of those emotions and what it's like to be a human living those moments. And we talked about a heck of a lot more during that interview. And to celebrate, we are going to be giving away this Music City Miracle jersey that is autographed by Kevin Dyson himself. All you have to do to enter the giveaway is, number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel that you're watching right now, and B, subscribe to the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football newsletter, the link for which we left down in the show notes below. And as a bonus, for 5 additional entries into the drawing, anybody who purchases a subscription to 2024 Fantasy Football from basementbrewedff.com is going to receive 5 additional entries into the drawing. The winner is going to be announced on Friday morning's episode of Inside the 20. Good luck. So, TLDR, DeAndre Swift, good. Zack Moss, bad. Kidding, of course. We're cautiously optimistic about DeAndre Swift in 2024 Fantasy Football, and we think Zack Moss might be a trap in 2024 Fantasy Football. If you want to know what to expect from Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, or Josh Jacobs in 2024, go right here, episode 7 of Inside the 20. If you want to know what to expect from Keenan Allen, Marquise Brown, or Calvin Ridley, go right here, episode 8 of Inside the 20. If you want to know what to expect from Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, or Austin Ekeler in 2024, go right here, episode 9 of Inside the 20. And of course, if you want to hear from Kevin Dyson about his role in the Music City Miracle and the devastating emotions of coming up 1 yard short in Super Bowl 34, you got to go here, episode 2 of In the Trenches, all of which is by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. If you liked today's episode and you thought it was helpful, please do us both a favor and click that subscribe button. It goes a long way to help us and goes a long way to help you. All this time chatting, and I haven't taken a moment to properly introduce myself. So hello, my friend. I am Mikey Henninger. I'm the guy who quit his comfy corporate 9-to-5 so that he could chase a childhood dream and build this business full-time from scratch. 300 plus fantasy football players are outsmarting their friends, dominating their leagues, winning DFS contests, cashing in on NFL bets, and they're doing all that using my 30 plus hours of weekly research, my cheat sheets, and my amazing online community and Discord channel. If you want to join us, I promise you that you will not be disappointed. Visit basementbrewedff.com or just use the link that we left for you in the show notes, and you're going to be able to A, support a small business, but B, set yourself up for success in 2024. And by the way, you do not want to wait until it's fantasy football season, because it's going to cost $20 more in August than it costs right here today in April. It'll literally never be cheaper than it is right here, right now. And if that wasn't enough for you, then how about this? Go ahead and enter promo code BBFF11 at checkout, and you're going to receive an extra 10% off your first year subscription to Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. That's all for now. Come back on Friday morning for more fantasy football impact on players who changed their jerseys. And speaking of jerseys, Friday morning is also the episode where I will be doing the giveaway for the Kevin Dyson autographed Music City Miracle jersey. So come back on Friday morning. Between now and then, I'll be right here. I'll be in the basement. I'll be updating my 2024 fantasy football draft guide. I'll be updating my best ball rankings. I'll be updating my rookie rankings for upcoming dynasty drafts and all the other cheat sheets that my subscribers are using to dominate in 2024. I'll see you on the fantasy football field on Friday morning. Cheers. This brew's for you.